He carried the alien Orphan through the storm, not knowing the king was watching. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The acid rain poured relentlessly across the barren landscape of Proxima B, each droplet capable of burning through standard-issue colony equipment in minutes. Mason Reed hunched his shoulders against the howling wind, the environmental suit's integrity warnings flashing in his helmet display. The colonial outpost lay 10 kilometers behind him, and safety remained at least 8 kilometers ahead. But the weight in his arms mattered more than any warning system. "It's okay, little one," Mason whispered, though he knew the young Proximian couldn't understand his words. The small alien child curled tighter against his chest, 6 delicate limbs wrapped around Mason's environmental suit. Its translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted between deep purple and electric blue. Fear signals. Mason had learned during his 3 years on this hostile planet. Mason had found the child huddled beneath the twisted wreckage of what he assumed was a Proximian transport vessel. The craft had crashed less than an hour ago, and Mason had been returning from routine maintenance on the colony's outer sensor array when he spotted the impact. Colony protocol strictly prohibited interaction with the native species, but when Mason saw the small, trembling form amid the bodies of what must have been its family, he couldn't bring himself to follow protocol. The wind shifted suddenly, driving the acidic rain harder against Mason's left side. His suit integrity dropped by another 5%. At this rate, he would have 40 minutes before exposure. The child made a soft, trilling sound, its luminescent patterns intensifying. I know, Mason said soothingly. "But we need to keep moving. I promise I'll get you somewhere safe." The storm was intensifying, just as the colony meteorologists had predicted. This region of Proxima B experienced catastrophic acid storms every 62 Earth days, and this one had arrived right on schedule. The colonists had battened down for the duration, which meant Mason was on his own until he could reach Emergency Shelter 17, a reinforced bunker established for precisely these situations. As Mason trudged forward, his boots sinking into the soft, moss-like ground cover that dominated this part of the landscape, he failed to notice the sleek, nearly invisible drone tracking his movements from 50 meters above. The drone, a product of technology far beyond human understanding, transmitted everything to watching eyes hundreds of kilometers away. In the subterranean capital of the Proximian dominant hive, King Tailron observed the humans' progress through a series of floating holographic displays. Unlike the small, vulnerable child in the human's arms, Tailron stood nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton a deep midnight blue adorned with intricate bioluminescent patterns denoting his royal status. 6 senior advisors hovered nervously around their king, their own patterns displaying a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Fascinating," Tailron said, his voice a melodic series of clicks and trills that reverberated through the cathedral-like chamber. "The human risks his life for a child not of his species." "Your Majesty," clicked First Advisor Velox, his patterns flashing with concern. "This may be a deception. The humans have been encroaching on our territory for years. This could be an elaborate ploy to gain our trust." "To what end?" asked Tailron, never taking his 4 eyes from the display. "They do not know we watch them. This human believes himself alone in the storm with a child who will likely never be missed. Perhaps a specimen for their research," suggested another advisor. "We have recovered evidence of their biological sampling programs." Tailron raised a limb for silence, watching intently as the human adjusted his hold on the child, shielding the young Proximian from a particularly violent gust of rain. "No," the king said finally. "Look at how he protects the child from the rain with his own body. His suit integrity is failing, yet he prioritizes the child's safety." The king moved closer to the display, his patterns shifting to a deep, contemplative blue. "We have observed humans for 3 of their years. They mine our resources, build their structures, and expand their colony with no regard for our world. Yet here is one who risked everything to save a child he has no obligation toward. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge their kind. On the surface, Mason was struggling. The acid rain had eaten through the outer layer of his suit in several places, and the secondary membrane was beginning to deteriorate. The shelter was still 3 kilometers away, and his legs burned with exhaustion. The Proximian child had gone worryingly still in his arms, its luminescence dimmed to a faint pulse. "Stay with me, little buddy," Mason urged, pushing himself to move faster despite the protest of his muscles. Just a bit further. As if in response to his words, the child's patterns briefly brightened. Mason smiled despite the dire situation. In the 3 years since humanity had established the research colony on Proxima b, there had been no official contact with the native species. The Proximians were elusive, seemingly primitive, and kept their distance from human settlements. Scientific observation suggested a pre-industrial civilization living in scattered tribal groups, an assessment that couldn't have been further from the truth. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was directly overhead now. Mason's suit integrity dropped below 40%, and new warning indicators flashed across his helmet display. In the distance, barely visible through the downpour, he could make out the raised concrete bunker of Shelter 17. "See that?" he said to the child. "That's where we're going. You'll be safe there." The child trilled softly, one delicate limb extending toward the structure before quickly retreating back against Mason's chest. In the royal chamber, Tailron and his advisors continued to watch the human's progress with growing interest. "He will not survive to reach the shelter," Velox observed dispassionately. "His protective covering is failing too rapidly." "Then we must intervene," Tailron declared, rising to his full height. A chorus of alarmed clicks and flashing patterns erupted from the advisors. "Your Majesty," Velox protested, "the observation protocol has been in place for generations. We cannot reveal ourselves to the humans until the Council reaches consensus on their threat assessment." "I am still king," Tailron responded, his patterns flaring with authority. "And I will not watch as a being sacrifices himself for one of our children." Before any further objections could be raised, Tailron issued a series of commands to his personal guard. Within moments, a sleek transport vessel rose from a hidden hangar and accelerated toward Mason's location. Mason stumbled as his right boot broke through a patch of moss into a pocket of acidic sludge beneath. He yanked his foot free, but not before the acid had eaten through the boot material. Pain lanced up his leg as the caustic substance found his skin. "Damn it," he gasped, limping forward with renewed urgency. The shelter was just over a kilometer away now, but his suit integrity had dropped to 25%. The acid was beginning to seep through multiple breach points, creating small, burning sensations across his shoulders and back. The Proximian child must have sensed his distress, as its patterns shifted to rapid pulses of deep red. It emitted a series of high-pitched trills that Mason had never heard before, almost like an alarm call. "It's okay," Mason said through gritted teeth, though the pain was becoming difficult to ignore. "We're almost there." The child's call continued, increasing in volume and intensity until it seemed to cut through the roar of the storm itself. Mason was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that he didn't notice the approaching hum of advanced machinery until a bright light suddenly cut through the rain directly ahead of him. Mason stopped short, blinking against the glare. A vessel unlike anything he'd ever seen hovered 10 meters away, its sleek, metallic surface unmarked by the acid rain. It was approximately 20 meters long, with an elegant, curved design that reminded Mason of the manta rays he'd seen in Earth's oceans. The vessel emitted no visible exhaust and made almost no sound despite holding a perfect hover in the violent storm. "What the hell?" Mason breathed, instinctively clutching the child closer. A section of the vessel's underside reconfigured itself, components sliding apart to reveal an opening from which a soft, golden light emanated. The Proximian child in Mason's arms began to trill excitedly, its patterns shifting to rapid bursts of blue and gold. Mason hesitated, uncertainty warring with the reality of his deteriorating suit. The acid had breached the inner layer in multiple locations now, and the burning sensation across his skin was intensifying. The shelter was still too far. Whatever this vessel was, it represented his only chance, and more importantly, the only chance for the child he'd risked everything to save. With a deep breath, Mason stepped forward into the light. The moment he crossed the threshold, the opening sealed behind him, cutting off the howling wind and driving rain. Mason found himself in a circular chamber with walls that seemed to pulse with the same bioluminescent patterns as the Proximian child. The air felt thick and humid, but blessedly free of acid. Mason carefully set the child down, watching as its 6 limbs extended to touch the floor. The moment the young Proximian made contact with the surface, the patterns in the walls intensified, seeming to respond to the child's presence. "Guess this is your people's technology," Mason said softly. Pretty impressive. His suit integrity warnings were still blaring, and Mason knew he needed to get out of the compromised environmental gear before the acid residue caused further damage. He began the emergency release sequence, carefully removing his helmet first. The air in the chamber had an odd, sweet scent, like cinnamon mixed with ozone. Mason took an experimental breath, ready to slap his helmet back on at the first sign of respiratory distress. But the air, while different, seemed breathable. As Mason continued removing his damaged suit, the child watched with evident curiosity, its head tilting at an angle that seemed almost comically human in its expression of interest. The child trilled softly, patterns rippling across its translucent skin in what Mason could only interpret as communication. "I wish I understood what you were saying, little one," Mason said with a tired smile. "I'm just glad you're safe now." The chamber suddenly hummed with energy, and a section of the wall reconfigured itself much as the vessel's underside had done. The opening revealed a broader space beyond, and through it stepped the most imposing figure Mason had ever encountered. The Proximian that entered stood at least 9 feet tall, with an exoskeleton that gleamed like polished obsidian. Unlike the child's translucent skin, this adult's exterior appeared armored and substantial, adorned with intricate bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with a dignified, measured rhythm. For large, multifaceted eyes regarded Mason with an intelligence that was impossible to mistake. Mason froze, his damaged suit half removed, and his body tensed for a confrontation. But before he could react further, the child sprang forward with a joyful trill, rushing to the imposing figure on its 6 delicate limbs. The adult Proximian reached down with surprising gentleness, allowing the child to climb up and nestle against what Mason assumed was the equivalent of a shoulder. The adult's patterns shifted in what appeared to be communication with the child, whose own patterns responded in kind. This exchange continued for several moments before the adult turned its attention back to Mason. "Human," the Proximian said, the word perfectly formed in English despite the alien physiology that should have made such pronunciation impossible. Mason's jaw dropped. "You speak our language?" "We have studied your kind since your arrival," the Proximian replied, its voice resonant and clear. "I am Tailron, sovereign of the United Hives of Proxima." Mason swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware that he was face to face with what appeared to be the leader of an advanced civilization that humanity had completely misunderstood. A civilization they had been mining resources from and building settlements upon without permission. "I'm Mason Reed," he managed to reply, "engineering specialist with the Proxima Research Colony." "Mason Reed," Tailron repeated, the name sounding oddly melodic in his inflection. "You rescued this child from certain death, carrying it through conditions that threatened your own survival. Why would you do this for a species not your own?" The question seemed genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Mason glanced at the child, who was watching him with those large, luminous eyes. "I couldn't just leave the little one there to die," Mason said simply. Anyone would have done the same. No, Tailron responded immediately. Many would not. Even among my own people, there are those who would prioritize survival over mercy toward an unknown entity. Your actions reveal something about humans that our observations had not yet confirmed. Mason shifted uncomfortably, both from the acid burns on his skin and the weight of this unexpected first contact situation. Look, I'm just an engineer. I'm not qualified to speak for humanity or Earth's colonial interests. I should really contact my superiors. In due time, Tailron said, his patterns shifting to something that seemed more relaxed. First, you require medical attention. The storm's essence has damaged your biological covering. Before Mason could respond, a panel in the floor slid open, and a smaller Proximian emerged, carrying what appeared to be a container of translucent gel. This new individual approached Mason cautiously, extending the container. This will neutralize the acid and promote healing, Tailron explained. It is harmless to human physiology. Mason hesitated only briefly before accepting the container. At this point, refusing aid seemed both foolish and potentially diplomatically disastrous. The gel had a cool, soothing effect the moment it touched his burned skin. "Thank you," Mason said, relief evident in his voice as the pain began to subside. "I appreciate your help. But I have to ask, if your civilization is this advanced, why have you been hiding from us? We thought the Proximians were pre-industrial, living in scattered tribal groups." Talaran's patterns shifted in what Mason would later learn was the equivalent of dry amusement, an intentional deception. "We have observed many species throughout our history," Mason read. "Experience has taught us the value of caution when encountering new intelligences. We have watched your kind establish your colony, extract our resources, and expand your presence on our world." Mason winced. "That doesn't sound good when you put it that way." "Indeed," Tailron agreed. "Many among my advisors advocate for your immediate removal from our world, by force if necessary." Mason's heart sank. The implications for the colony's 3,000 residents were terrifying if the Proximians possessed technology like this vessel. Humanity had no idea they had essentially been trespassing on the territory of an advanced civilization. However, Tailron continued, his patterns shifting to a more contemplative configuration, "Your actions today have given me reason to reconsider our approach. You had no obligation to save this child. Your colony protocols, which we have accessed from your communication systems, explicitly forbid interaction with native species. Yet you risked your life and violated your directives to preserve the life of a being completely unknown to you." The Proximian child trilled softly from its perch on Talaran's shoulder, its patterns pulsing in sync with the king's for a brief moment. "This child is of the royal lineage," Tailron said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "My sister's offspring, sent to observe the surface conditions in a protected transport that was ultimately unable to withstand the storm's unexpected intensity. You did not simply save a Proximian child, Mason read. You saved a member of my family." Mason blinked in surprise. "I had no idea. I just saw someone who needed help." "Precisely," Tailron responded. "And that is why I have decided that perhaps our peoples can find a path forward together, rather than in conflict. Your individual act of compassion has opened a door that might otherwise have remained closed." As the vessel continued its journey to an unknown destination, Mason found himself in the unprecedented position of accidental diplomat. The acid burns on his skin were rapidly healing thanks to the Proximian gel, but his mind was racing with the implications of this encounter. "Where are we going?" he finally asked. "To our capital," Tailron replied. "It is time for your people to learn the truth about Proxima B and its inhabitants. You will communicate with your leaders, and I with my council. Together, we will determine if coexistence is possible." The child trilled again, extending a delicate limb toward Mason in what seemed like a gesture of connection. Mason smiled and gently touched the offered limb with his finger. "I think it already is," he said softly. Unknown to Mason, This simple exchange was being broadcast throughout the Proximian communication network, reaching millions of the planet's true inhabitants who had remained hidden from human detection. For the first time, many were seeing a human not as an invader to be feared, but as a being capable of selfless compassion. In the Proximian royal chamber, advisors watched the interaction with a mixture of skepticism and hope. First advisor Velox studied the human's expressions and body language, searching for signs of deception but finding none. The human appears genuine in his concern for the child, Velox reluctantly admitted to the other advisors. Perhaps there is more to these creatures than our initial assessment suggested. The king takes a significant risk, responded another advisor, patterns flashing with worry. If this human's behavior is an anomaly among his kind, revealing ourselves could lead to conflict rather than cooperation. Yet if we do not attempt communication, conflict becomes inevitable as they continue to expand their presence, countered a third advisor. At least this way, we choose the time and manner of revelation. As the royal vessel descended through hidden passages into the vast subterranean network that housed the true Proximian civilization, Mason stared in wonder at the spectacle unfolding before him. Massive chambers carved from the living rock stretched for kilometers in every direction, illuminated by the same bioluminescent technology that adorned the Proximians themselves. Structures of impossible grace and complexity rose from the cavern floor, while transport vessels similar to the one carrying him moved along invisible pathways through the air. "This is incredible," Mason breathed, moving closer to the viewport. "We had no idea any of this existed beneath the surface. Your scanning technology is primitive compared to our shielding capabilities," Telron explained, a note of pride evident in his voice. "We have lived beneath the surface for thousands of years, since the planet's atmosphere began its transformation to its current caustic state. But the storms, they don't affect you the same way they affect us. Our biology evolved alongside the changing atmosphere," Telron said. "While the storms remain dangerous even to us, we can withstand brief exposures without the protective coverings your kind requires. The child you saved was protected by a biological film that was damaged in the crash. Without your intervention, it would not have survived." The vessel slowed as it approached a central structure that dwarfed those around it, a towering spire that pulsed with complex patterns of light. Mason realized with growing amazement that the entire city was essentially alive, its technology so seamlessly integrated with biology that the distinction between the two had become meaningless. As the vessel docked within the spire, Mason thought of the colony's leadership and how they would react to this revelation. Director Harrington had always maintained a strictly scientific approach to Proxima B, emphasizing research and resource extraction while minimizing environmental impact. Would she be open to diplomatic relations with a species whose existence upended everything they thought they knew about this world? "Your people will be shocked," Mason said as they disembarked from the vessel into a vast, cathedral-like chamber within the spire. "As were mine when you first arrived," Telron responded. "Fear of the unknown is a universal constant, it seems. But so too is the capacity to move beyond that fear when presented with evidence that challenges our preconceptions." The Proximian child had fallen asleep during their journey, its patterns now pulsing with the slow, steady rhythm that Mason recognized as the equivalent of peaceful slumber. Telron carefully transferred the sleeping child to another adult Proximian who approached with deferential movements. "Rest now, Mason Reed," Telron said, gesturing toward what appeared to be an alcove designed to accommodate a being of human proportions. "The healing gel will work more effectively if you allow your body to focus its energy on recovery rather than activity. When you awaken, we will establish communication with your colony and begin the process of formal introduction between our peoples." Mason wanted to protest, to insist that the colony be contacted immediately, but the events of the day had taken their toll. The combination of physical exertion, injury, and emotional strain had left him exhausted. The alcove looked remarkably inviting, and the gel had induced a pleasant drowsiness as it worked to heal his acid burns. All right, Mason agreed reluctantly, but just for a little while. As Mason settled into the surprisingly comfortable alcove, he reflected on how completely his understanding of Proxima B had been transformed in the span of a few hours. What had begun as a routine maintenance assignment had evolved into a first contact situation with implications that would echo across human history. The last thing Mason saw before drifting into sleep was the Proximian child, now awake again and watching him from the arms of its caretaker. The child raised a delicate limb in what seemed remarkably like a human wave. Mason smiled and returned the gesture before his eyes closed and sleep claimed him. In his dreams, Mason saw the storm raging across the surface of Proxima B, but this time he wasn't alone in facing it. Humans and Proximians worked side by side. Their technologies merged to create structures that could withstand the planet's harsh conditions. It was a vision of possibility, a future born from a simple act of compassion in the midst of a storm. And as he slept, watched over by beings from a world not his own, the first tentative bridge between two species began to form. A bridge built not from grand diplomatic gestures or formal treaties, but from the fundamental recognition of shared values across the gulf of biological difference. A bridge that began when one human carried an alien child through a storm, not knowing the king was watching. Mason awoke to a gentle chiming sound, his mind momentarily disoriented as he tried to place the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day rushed back: the storm, the rescue, the revelation of an advanced Proximian civilization. He sat up quickly, noticing that the acid burns that had covered his body were completely healed, leaving only faint pink marks where the worst injuries had been. "The healing is complete," came Talleyrand's now familiar voice from the chamber entrance. "Your biological recovery rate is impressive." Mason turned to see the Proximian king, accompanied by the child he had rescued and several other Proximians of varying sizes and coloration patterns. The child trilled excitedly upon seeing Mason awake, its patterns flashing in what Mason was beginning to recognize as happiness. "How long was I asleep?" Mason asked, running a hand through his hair. 14 standard hours by your measurement," Talleyrand replied. "Your colony has been searching for you. Their communications indicate significant concern for your well-being." Mason winced. "I need to contact them immediately. They'll be thinking I was caught in the storm." "Preparations have been made," Talleyrand said, gesturing toward an adjoining chamber. "But first, there is someone who wishes to express gratitude." The child moved forward, separating from the group to approach Mason. In its upper limbs, it carried what appeared to be a small crystalline object that pulsed with soft blue light. With delicate movements, the child extended the crystal toward Mason. "This is Nalera, my sister's offspring," Talleyrand explained. "She wishes to present you with a gift of recognition." Mason carefully accepted the crystal, surprised by its warmth and the way it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat once it touched his skin. "It's beautiful," he said, smiling at Nalera. "Thank you." Nalera trilled in response, her patterns shifting in complex ways that Mason couldn't interpret but clearly conveyed emotion. "The crystal is a memory stone," Talleyrand explained. "It has been programmed with Nalera's experience of your rescue. It is a significant gift among our people, a sharing of perspective that bridges understanding between individuals." Mason held the crystal with newfound reverence. "I'm honored. Please tell her that." "She understands your words," Talleyrand said, his patterns shifting in what Mason was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Our study of your language has been comprehensive. It is only our physiology that makes pronunciation difficult for most of my kind." Mason looked at Nalera with surprise. "You understand everything I'm saying?" Nalera trilled affirmatively, her patterns pulsing in confirmation. "Well, in that case," Mason said, addressing Nalera directly, "I'm very glad you're safe. And I'm amazed by your home and your people. Thank you for sharing this with me." Nalera's patterns brightened, and she extended a delicate limb to touch Mason's hand briefly before retreating back to the group. "Now," Tailron said, his tone shifting to one of greater formality, "we must address the matter of your colony. Your people are unaware of our true nature and capabilities. This revelation must be managed carefully to prevent misunderstanding or fear-driven responses." Mason nodded, the weight of his unexpected diplomatic role settling on his shoulders. "I agree. Director Harrington is scientifically minded, but she's also cautious. Finding out that Proxima B has an advanced civilization living beneath the surface will be, well, shocking doesn't begin to cover it. Which is why you will make the initial contact," Tailron said. "A familiar face delivering unexpected news will ease the transition. We have prepared a communication station calibrated to your colony's frequencies." Mason followed Tailron and the group into the adjoining chamber, where a console unlike anything in the human colony waited. Its surfaces appeared to be living material, pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns that characterized Proximian technology. "Simply speak," Tailron instructed. "The system will transmit your voice and image to your colony's communication center." Mason took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. How does one begin to explain something like this? He placed his hand on the console, which responded to his touch by glowing more brightly. "Proxima Research Colony. This is engineering specialist Mason Reed. Authentication code Echo 79er Delta. Please respond." There was a moment of silence before the console flashed, and a voice responded with evident relief. "Mason." "Thank God." It was Lauren Bennett, the colony's communications officer. "We've had search teams looking for you since the storm cleared. Where are you? Are you injured?" "I'm fine, Lauren," Mason replied, choosing his next words carefully. "But I need to speak with Director Harrington immediately. It's urgent, and it's about the Proximians." There was a pause before Lauren's voice returned, tension evident in her tone. "Stand by. I'm transferring you to the director's office." Moments later, Director Emma Harrington's stern face appeared on a display that materialized above the console. Her expression shifted from professional concern to visible relief when she saw Mason. "Reed, good to see you alive. Your locator signal went dark during the storm. Report your situation." Mason glanced at Tailron, who nodded encouragingly. "Director," Mason began, "I'm currently in a facility beneath the surface of Proxima B, approximately 20 kilometers from the colony. I've made contact with the native species, and they're not what we thought they were." Harrington's expression hardened. "Explain." "The Proximians have an advanced civilization, Director. Far more advanced than ours in many ways. They've been observing us since we arrived. I'm standing next to their leader right now." Harrington's eyes widened slightly, the closest thing to shock Mason had ever seen from the stoic director. "Is this communication secure, Reed?" "Yes, ma'am. They've calibrated to our frequencies." "Are you under duress? Blink twice if you're being coerced." Mason couldn't help but smile. "No, Director. I'm here voluntarily. During the storm, I rescued a Proximian child from a crash transport. It turns out the child is related to their leader. They saved me from the storm in return and brought me to their city." Harrington was silent for a long moment, her scientific mind visibly processing this radical new information. "I want to speak with them," she finally said. Tailron stepped forward, his imposing form now visible in the transmission. "I am Tailron, sovereign of the United Hives of Proxima. Your colony member speaks the truth. We have watched your kind since your arrival, but recent events have prompted me to initiate direct contact." Harrington maintained her composure admirably in the face of this extraordinary situation. "I see. And what are your intentions toward our colony?" "We came to Proxima B for scientific research and limited resource harvesting. We had no knowledge of an advanced native civilization. A fact we deliberately concealed," Tailron acknowledged. "Previous encounters with spacefaring species have taught us caution. However, Mason Reed's actions have demonstrated values that suggest our peoples may be compatible. I propose a formal diplomatic meeting to establish parameters for coexistence." Harrington's scientific training was evident in her measured response. I accept your proposal. When and where do you suggest this meeting take place? I will send a transport vessel to your colony in 6 hours, Tailron replied. Mason Reed will accompany it as a familiar presence. You may select 5 representatives to join the diplomatic party. We will provide appropriate environmental protection for the surface journey. Agreed, Harrington said after a brief consideration. Reed, are you certain of your safety there? Absolutely, Director, Mason assured her. They've treated me with nothing but respect. They even healed the acid burns I sustained during the storm. Harrington nodded. Very well. We'll prepare for contact in 6 hours. Harrington out. As the communication ended, Mason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That went better than I expected. Your director appears to be a rational being, Tailron observed. This bodes well for our discussions. She's practical above all else, Mason agreed. If there's a way for our peoples to benefit mutually from cooperation, she'll find it. Talleyrand's patterns shifted thoughtfully. Before the diplomatic party arrives, there is something you should see. Something that will help you understand why this alliance matters beyond mere peaceful coexistence. The king led Mason and the group through a series of chambers, eventually arriving at what appeared to be a massive observation room. One wall was entirely transparent, revealing a view not of the subterranean city but of space, the star Proxima Centauri and the black void beyond, studded with distant stars. This is a real-time transmission from our orbital monitoring stations, Tailron explained. We have been watching not just your colony, but the space beyond our system. The view shifted, focusing on a particular section of space where a faint anomaly was barely visible against the blackness. 3 of your Earth years ago, our sensors detected this approaching entity, Tailron said, his tone grave. It has been accelerating toward the Proxima system at a rate that suggests artificial propulsion rather than natural movement. Mason squinted at the display. What is it? We believe it to be an automated probe or vanguard of a species we encountered approximately 800 years ago, Tailron replied. A species we call the Harvesters. They do not seek alliance or cooperation, only resources and territory. They consume worlds and move on. The implications sent a chill down Mason's spine. And they're coming here? To Proxima B? Yes. Our calculations suggest arrival within 2 of your Earth years. Alone, we might withstand their initial approach, but not their full invasion, which would follow the vanguard. Your people's technology, particularly your fusion drive systems and quantum communication arrays, could be adapted to enhance our defensive capabilities. In turn, our knowledge of the Harvesters and our bioluminescent technology could provide your colony with significant advantages. Mason stared at the distant anomaly with new understanding. This isn't just about our colony trespassing on your world. You need allies. As do you, Tailron said simply. The Harvesters do not distinguish between native species and visitors. All biological life is harvested for their purposes. The Proximian child, Nalera, moved closer to Mason, her patterns displaying what he now recognized as concern. She reached out to touch the memory crystal still in Mason's hand, causing it to glow more brightly. Nalera wishes you to access the memory, Tailron explained. It contains not only her experience of the rescue, but a shared ancestral memory of the previous Harvester encounter. Mason looked down at the crystal uncertainly. How do I access it? Hold it against your forehead, Tailron instructed. The resonance patterns will synchronize with your neural activity. With only slight hesitation, Mason raised the crystal to his forehead. The moment it made contact, the world around him disappeared. He was no longer in the observation chamber, but floating in space, witnessing a planet similar to Proxima B being surrounded by massive, crystalline structures that unfolded like geometric flowers. Where these structures touched the planet's surface, the land blackened and died, resources being systematically extracted and processed. He could feel the terror and loss experienced by the Proximians who had fled that world, ancestors who had found refuge on Proxima, be only to discover that their pursuers' reach was longer than anticipated. The vision shifted, showing Proximian scientists developing the bioluminescent technology and subterranean habitats that would hide their civilization from orbital scanning. The desperate race to disappear before the harvesters returned. When Mason lowered the crystal, his hands were shaking. I felt everything they felt. Memory stones contain emotional context as well as visual record, Tailron explained. It is how we preserve our history with full understanding across generations. The harvesters destroyed your original homeworld, Mason said, the borrowed memories still vivid in his mind. You came here as refugees. Yes, and now they have found us again. The cycle continues unless we can break it, together. Mason looked at Nalera, understanding now why his act of rescue had resonated so deeply with the Proximians. A civilization of refugees would value compassion toward the vulnerable above almost any other trait. I'll help convince Director Harrington of the threat, Mason promised. This goes beyond just our two species now. In the 6 hours before the diplomatic transport was scheduled to depart, Tailron gave Mason a tour of the Proximian capital, explaining their society and technology in greater detail. The subterranean network extended across the entire planet, with specialized hives focusing on different aspects of Proximian civilization, science, agriculture, defense, and arts. Your people have achieved something remarkable here, Mason observed as they watched Proximian engineers manipulating living material to construct new habitation chambers. You've integrated technology with biology in ways humans have only theorized about. Necessity drove our innovation, Tailron replied. When we arrived on this world, the surface was already becoming inhospitable. We had to adapt or perish. Like the child's protective film that was damaged in the crash, Mason recalled. Yes, all Proximians generate a natural protective coating that shields against the acidic environment, but it requires conscious maintenance. The young and elderly are most vulnerable when that coating is compromised. As they continued their tour, Mason was introduced to members of the scientific hive who had been studying human technology since the colony's establishment. They displayed remarkable understanding of human engineering principles, having remotely accessed and analyzed the colony's computer systems with ease. Your cybersecurity might need some upgrades, Mason noted with a wry smile. Your systems were designed to defend against human intrusion methods, one of the scientists explained, patterns flashing with what Mason now recognized as the Proximian equivalent of amusement. Our approach was unconventional by your standards. When the time came to return to the surface, Mason found himself almost reluctant to leave the fascinating subterranean world. Nalera accompanied the group to the transport vessel, her patterns displaying a complex mixture of emotions that Mason was beginning to understand intuitively. I'll be back soon, he assured her, kneeling to meet her at eye level. With people who can help us prepare for what's coming. Nalera trilled softly, extending all 6 of her limbs to embrace Mason in what could only be described as a hug. The gesture, so human despite their biological differences, brought a lump to Mason's throat. The journey back to the colony was swift, the Proximian transport vessel covering distance with an efficiency that made human shuttles seem primitive by comparison. Mason spent the time briefing Tailron on what to expect from Director Harrington and the likely members of her diplomatic team. Dr. Nathan Brooks will probably be there. He's our xenobiologist and has been studying surface samples for Proximian biological traces since we arrived. He'll be fascinated by your physiology. Dr. Julia Clark is our cultural anthropologist. She'll be interested in your social structures. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole handles colony security. He'll be concerned about defensive implications. And your director? What motivates her? Tailron inquired. Mason considered the question. Knowledge. Scientific advancement. The colony was established to study Proxima b and determine its suitability for larger-scale human settlement. Finding an advanced native civilization changes everything about our mission parameters. Yet you believe she will adapt to this new paradigm? She's practical, Mason said confidently. Once she understands the threat the harvesters pose, she'll recognize the value of cooperation. The transport vessel arrived at the colony's perimeter right on schedule. Through the viewport, Mason could see a small reception committee waiting outside the main airlock, Director Harrington, and exactly 4 other colony officials, just as requested. "They're ready for us," Mason observed. "As are we," Tailron replied, his patterns steady and calm. "A new chapter begins for both our peoples." The vessel landed with barely a whisper of sound, settling onto the colony's landing pad with precision. Mason took a deep breath, suddenly aware of his role in this historic moment, a moment that would never have occurred if he hadn't made the split-second decision to rescue a child during a storm. As the vessel's exit portal reconfigured itself, Mason stepped through first, nodding respectfully to Director Harrington. "Director, thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Harrington's eyes moved past Mason to the towering figure of Tailron emerging from the vessel. To her credit, she showed no outward sign of intimidation. "Engineering Specialist Reed, I see your report was accurate. Welcome to Proxima Research Colony, Your Majesty." Talleyrand's patterns shifted in acknowledgement of the formal greeting. "Director Harrington, your adaptation to unexpected circumstances speaks well of your leadership capabilities." "Adaptation is essential to survival," Harrington replied diplomatically, "particularly when one discovers that the fundamental assumptions of their mission were incomplete." "A diplomatic way of saying we've been operating in ignorance," Dr. Nathan Brooks murmured, his eyes wide with scientific fascination as he studied Talleyrand's physiology. "Introductions are in order," Harrington said, gesturing to her team. Dr. Nathan Brooks, Xenobiology. Dr. Julia Clark, Cultural Anthropology. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole, Security. And Riley Cooper, our Resource Management Director. Each nodded in turn, their expressions ranging from Cole's professional wariness to Clark's barely contained excitement. "I am Tailron, Sovereign of the United Hives," the Proximian King responded. "With me are First Advisor Velox and representatives from our scientific, defense, and cultural exchange hives." The introductions complete, Harrington gestured toward the colony's main structure. "We've prepared a meeting facility that should accommodate your physical requirements, Your Majesty. However, before we proceed, I must ask, is there an immediate reason for this contact after 3 years of observation?" "There is," Tailron confirmed, his patterns shifting to a more somber configuration. "A threat approaches the Proxima system that concerns both our peoples. Mason Reed has seen evidence of this threat, which we call the Harvesters." Harrington's gaze shifted to Mason, who nodded gravely. "It's real, Director. The Proximians have orbital sensors that detected an approaching vessel, advanced scouts for a species that strip mines planets and harvests all biological material." "That's a significant claim," Lieutenant Commander Cole interjected skeptically. "What proof can you provide?" "We have prepared data packets compatible with your systems," Velox stated, producing a crystalline device similar to but larger than the memory stone Nalera had given Mason. This contained sensor readings, historical records, and predictive models of the Harvester's approach vector. Dr. Brooks stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding protocol. "May I examine this technology?" The data transfer mechanism alone represents a significant advancement over our current systems. "Dr. Brooks," Harrington cautioned, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting." The group proceeded into the colony's central complex, passing through corridors where off-duty colonists stopped and stared in amazement at the Proximian delegation. News of first contact had spread quickly throughout the colony, but seeing the reality of the advanced aliens was something else entirely. In the colony's conference facility, screens displayed the data from the Proximian crystal, showing in stark detail the approaching Harvester vanguard and projections of its arrival timeline. 2 years, Harrington murmured, studying the data with a scientist's critical eye. "Assuming these projections are accurate, that gives us minimal time to prepare." "Less than minimal by conventional standards," Tailron agreed. which is why I propose an immediate knowledge exchange. Your fusion technology combined with our bioluminescent energy systems could create defensive capabilities neither of us could achieve alone. And what would you expect from us in return for this alliance? Cole asked, still clearly skeptical. Mutual defense, Tailron replied simply. Your colony becomes part of our protective network. Your people gain access to subsurface habitats that can withstand both the planet's storms and orbital bombardment. Together, we prepare for the Harvester's arrival. Harrington was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. This goes beyond my authority as colony director. I would need to contact Earth. By all means, Tailron agreed. However, given the communication delay between systems, I suggest we begin preliminary cooperation while awaiting their response. The Harvesters will not delay their approach while we await bureaucratic decisions. Mason stepped forward. Director, I've seen their city. I've experienced their memories through their technology. The threat is real, and their offer is genuine. This isn't just about scientific discovery anymore. It's about survival. Harrington looked at Mason thoughtfully, then back to the data displays showing the approaching threat. Mr. Cooper, what resource implications would this cooperation have for the colony? Riley Cooper had been studying the Proximian technology with intense interest. Based on what I'm seeing, Director, it would be a net positive. Their energy efficiency alone would solve our power generation constraints. If they're willing to share this technology, we'd be fools to refuse. Dr. Clark, Harrington prompted, turning to the anthropologist. From a cultural perspective, this is unprecedented, Clark replied, her eyes bright with academic excitement. But the fundamental question is simple. Can two species with different evolutionary paths find common ground in the face of extinction? History suggests that shared threats create the strongest alliances. Harrington nodded, turning finally to Lieutenant Commander Cole. Security assessment? Cole frowned, his military training evident in his cautious approach. If the threat data is accurate, we can't face it alone. Our defenses were designed for environmental hazards, not interstellar war. I don't like admitting it, but we need their help, and they apparently need ours. Then we are in agreement, Harrington concluded, turning back to Tailron. Pending approval from Earth authorities, Proxima Research Colony accepts your proposal for mutual defense and technology exchange. I'll compose a message to Earth immediately, but as you said, we shouldn't wait for their response to begin preparations. Talleyrand's patterns shifted to what Mason now recognized as satisfaction. A wise decision, Director Harrington. I believe this marks the beginning of a significant alliance between our peoples. As the meeting continued into technical discussions of how to implement the cooperation, Mason found himself watching the interactions with a sense of pride and wonder. 3 days ago, he had been a simple colony engineer maintaining sensor arrays. Now he stood at the crossroads of history, all because he couldn't leave a child to die in a storm. Later that evening, as the Proximian delegation prepared to return to their subterranean capital with the first group of human scientists and engineers, Tailron approached Mason privately. You will be remembered among my people, Mason Reed, the king said, his patterns conveying deep sincerity. When the full history of our species' interaction is recorded, it will begin with you carrying a child through a storm. Mason smiled, thinking of Nalera and the crystal that now hung around his neck on a simple cord. I just did what seemed right at the time. I had no idea it would lead to all this. The most profound changes often begin with the simplest acts of compassion, Tailron observed. Will you continue to serve as liaison between our peoples? Your unique perspective would be valuable as we move forward. Mason nodded without hesitation. I'd be honored. Besides, I promised Nalera I'd be back. She will be pleased, Tailron said, his patterns shifting to something Mason hadn't seen before, something that seemed almost like familial affection. She has designated you as kin by choice in our traditions. It is a significant honor among Proximians. Mason blinked in surprise. I don't know what to say. No response is necessary. It is simply a truth now recorded in our collective memory, Tailron replied. Come, the transport awaits. As they walked toward the waiting vessel, Mason reflected on how completely his understanding of his place in the universe had changed in the span of a few days. What began as a simple act of compassion had opened the door to something much greater, an alliance that might save two civilizations from extinction. In the weeks and months that followed, the cooperation between humans and Proximians deepened. Earth authorities, faced with irrefutable evidence of both the Proximian civilization and the approaching harvester threat, authorized full diplomatic relations and technology exchange. Human engineers worked alongside Proximian scientists to develop hybrid defense systems incorporating the best aspects of both species' technologies. Nalera became something of a celebrity among both populations, the child whose rescue had changed the course of two civilizations. She showed a particular aptitude for human languages, eventually becoming a translator and cultural liaison in her own right as she matured. When the Harvester Vanguard finally arrived at the edge of the Proxima system, it encountered not a vulnerable planet ripe for harvesting, but a world protected by technology unlike anything the Harvesters had faced before. Human-designed quantum targeting systems guided Proximian bioluminescent energy weapons with devastating accuracy. The Vanguard probe was destroyed before it could transmit data back to its fleet. The battle was not over. The main Harvester fleet would eventually discover the fate of their Vanguard and adjust their approach. But for the first time in their history, the Proximians had hoped that the cycle of flight and pursuit might finally be broken. And humans, still relative newcomers to interstellar exploration, had found not just allies but friends among the stars. And it all began because one man carried an alien orphan through a storm, not knowing the king was watching. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.